The following discussion is not necessarily the views of all involved. The goal is to start open and honest discussion in the Christian worldview. Like all things, weigh what you hear with what you know and join us in our pursuit for the truth. Enjoy the podcast.
We should write a book about it and call it For Goodness Sakes. The farthest we'll go is Gecko Church. If that's what you believe, I encourage you.
No. 15 minutes can save you 15 minutes. She said a card
Well,
shirt.
this is devolved.
Man, yeah, I'm sorry. All right, I'd like to welcome everyone to the Second Rate Saints podcast. I'm one of your hosts here, Caleb. To my left is...
Joshua. To my left is...
I'm Joel, and to my left,
It's me, Caleb. We've gone full circle. Sadly, so sadly, we are missing both Colton and Stuart. It's a sad day, but the show must go on. We have the three of us. Josh is already yawning.
kind of the stars, I would say.
Okay.
Yeah, the other two are the sun and the moon.
We were voted. They were voted off the island, as it were.
I'm speechless.
I'm trying to give lore.
How fast you guys are just like,
Well, it's like we always start on a weird note where we're like, we really miss those guys. Anyways, I guess we have to do a podcast now. It's like, no, I'm still happy to be here. I just wish they
Also,
were here.
I didn't put them under the bus. I said that they are the sun and the moon.
yeah, you used a weird
Yeah.
analogy that didn't mean anything.
Except
Anyway,
usually the sun and the moon are both gone at the same time, Josh. Anyways,
Joel, do we do things on the internet?
occasionally, yeah.
That's good.
Any more questions?
Holy
No, I'm
moly.
kidding. Yes, we've got secondratesaints.com that you can check out everything we're doing online. Our weekly shows, our blog posts, our book reviews, all of that. If you'd like to contribute to the growth of Second Rate Saints in a financial manner, we do have a Buy Me a Coffee link, which is on the website, correct, Caleb?
It is.
Cool. I didn't check up on that after, but yeah.
It is. It is there.
on there. Cool. Which is buymeacoffee.com/secondRateSaints. And we've got stuff that's coming down the line. I'm very excited to see what the future projects for Second Rate Saints holds. So yeah, keep checking out that website.
Yes.
Oh, also, if you have questions, comments, or concerns, please email us at secondratesaints@gmail.com. Thanks.
It makes my day when that happens.
Yeah.
Going right back to you, Joel.
Oh, really?
Do you read books?
Yeah. Read
Yeah.
a book.
You've read a book recently,
I read a book very recently.
and you want to talk about it.
So this one's been a slow burn. I've been working on this one kind of on and off for a little while and trying to take decently diligent notes on it. It's one called Identity and Idolatry in the New Studies in Biblical Theology series by,
IVP.
what is it? IVP, yeah.
Yeah.
It's by a guy named Richard Lintz.
I think we've done two other books in that series before.
I think it's more than two
Maybe.
because we did Daniel.
We did Daniel, and we did Jonah.
Yes. Maybe it's not more than two because I can't remember what the other one would be. Unless you've done Revelation yet, have you? Because I know you
All
read
Things
that.
New one, yes.
Yeah.
I don't know if I've talked about it on the podcast. Sorry.
Oh,
Yes,
anyways,
it's great.
It's a very good series. It continues to it's edited by D.A. Carson, who's got some pretty solid material, and he just continually hits it out of the park. So what I kind of got mostly from Identity and Idolatry is it was a really good. A little while ago on a Thoughts in Real Time episode, we had a conversation on what idolatry was. And this doesn't get quite as much into the historical details on it in the same way that we kind of tried to, but it does get into the image of God pretty heavily, using that in Genesis, kind of setting up the world as a temple and then placing man as the image of God last into the temple, kind of imitating this ceremonial coming together of, well, it would be Canaanite, wouldn't it? Canaanite temple stuff or Babylonian temple stuff?
Yeah,
Like-
I think it's generic, like generic Mesopotamian. If I'm remembering my John Walton reading.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, because Walton will cover some of that stuff as well. Yeah, it was very interesting. And the way that he kind of all tied it together, because there's this conversation that happens all the time. What is the image of God? I'm not of the opinion that we look like God. mostly because we don't look like each other, right? Like there's not a unity of the visual human experience, and it's kind of negligible to see it as that sense, right? Maybe it's consciousness. Some people have talked about that. Maybe it is our position within creation, that we are to go forth and subdue it, something like that. But he tries to make it a lot more. He puts a box around it and then allows you to play within that box.
Cool.
Right? That we are meant to reflect the Creator. That is his main idea, is that the image of God is that which reflects God. Right? And he even, one of my favorite comparisons he makes is the opposite. See if I can get this right. The opposite of the image of God is the idol maker. Not necessarily the idol worshiper, but somebody who creates something in their own image that makes their own identity for themselves and then puts that up to a sacred place.
Mhm.
Right? So rather than saying it is idolatry, that is the inverse of being the image of God, it is making your own gods. That is the inverse of this creator-creation relationship.
Because you're placing yourself in the creator place and something else in the
Exactly.
creator.
Yeah.
Would
Yeah.
you say that late stage secular existentialism is that?
Yeah.
Can you
Absolutely.
please describe
Sure.
what that is for the
I could
audience
try.
and myself?
Existentialism assumes, secular existentialism assumes there is no meaning, therefore we build and ascribe meaning, and that is the only meaning in life, right? And that is the values you live to. It's Nietzsche's Übermensch,
Yeah.
right? Superman, the one who can create values, and that's what society now moves on.
Mhm.
Yeah, and which is like why you have people that are just like, what's your truth? What's this?
Yeah.
What's that?
Well, and then the argument is, well, if we're the image of God and we reflect God, then what I see in both myself and others, that is a piece of God.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, okay, here's the thing. Even if a mirror is broken, it still reflects, right? So while the essence of the image of God is still there, while the nature of the image of God is still there, we don't necessarily see it reflected in all the right ways. In fact, the way that it's most obvious is where it's twisted. And we're like, that's clearly not God. But there's something about that person that's inherently valuable because they're created in the image of God.
Interesting.
Yeah, he picks it apart. He does clarify a couple of times, don't go searching for the meaning of life in the image of God. It is something that shows up in the first 3 chapters of the Bible and then is never revisited again, right? There are ideas that reference back to it, but it's a good chance that idolatry is the reason why you never really hear about it after Genesis, because we become so obsessed with images. We become so obsessed with what we can see that we don't actually, the relationship with God that's kind of laid out after that is clearly much more of the spiritual, of the relational, of the, more about your relation to the Creator. So you being an image of God is so easily distorted that scribes likely never used that
Yeah.
to reference
And I've heard
humanity
people
again.
I've heard people go from that to then go how in the relationship between Adam and Eve, there's something about the image of God in that.
Okay.
And you see that's picked up in the New Testament of how Christ loves the church and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And
you're being-
underneath that, there's a bunch of understanding of wholeness and closeness that only comes through the sexual union between the two genders. And yet that's not really talked too much about throughout the Bible.
Yeah.
Because it's like, that could become easily distorted and perverted and abused.
Yeah. Well, idolatry is so closely associated with infidelity, right? Just because there is this sexual perversion to it. But there's also this relational perversion to it, that it is misaligning the loves of, which is like,
Augustinian
Yeah.
way of looking
Yeah.
at things.
It's probably because this idea of the image of God and its relationship with humanity being in wholeness is so deep that it takes the whole Bible to present that idea. And that's why if you continue with the idea that we're being conformed to the image of Christ into the image of God idea, you've got us as priests and kings, like being a kingdom of priests. You've got us in that marriage sense. You've got Christ and the church. You've got all of these themes that feed into this one idea, that it not being named as one singular thing is probably because it's so complex.
Yeah.
And the way that the image of God helps
Mhm.
organize thoughts like that
Yeah.
is that it is not imitation, it's reflection.
Yeah.
Right? So that it is representing God in the way that he created us to act, essentially. Right? Which is why right relationship, even in like marital unions, like what you were saying, Caleb, is 100% tied somehow to the image of God.
Yeah.
Even though I think hard and fast rules around what that is can be dangerous and can lead you into its own type of existentialism. That is, we only have meaning because someone looks a certain way. It's not great. It gets into serpent seed stuff, which was a bit of a heresy in early Pentecostal stuff.
Interesting.
Yeah, don't want to drop that. Just right at the end of this book.
Back to the book though.
No, I'm going to talk about this some more.
I'm kidding. How long is it? What do you think? Who's the type of person you would recommend it to? And Josh, how's the cover?
So it's 170 pages, something like that. Not super long, about 8 chapters. He does a good job of focusing the chapters in certain ways. Like he definitely argues from the thesis in each chapter. You could probably read each chapter by itself.
Okay.
So if you're looking for solid answers to specific questions, just check out the table of contents, and you're going to have a pretty good chance of finding what you're looking for.
So if any of the things we discussed kind of,
If you would like to look more into that. In some sections, it's brutally technical.
Okay.
And in others, it's I'm reading it and I'm like, man, this preaches. Can I have that back for a second?
Yeah.
There's a quote. Let's see.
While he's looking for that quote, Josh,
Cover?
cover.
That's a 1.
Give it up, Josh. It's beautiful.
It's I mean, it's just gray.
Yeah, but like you're colorblind, so that's like normal.
No.
I always play up how bad your colorblindness is.
No, that's monochronism.
You're right. Interesting. Yeah, that series has a bland attire, and then it's just a single image. But
Yes.
fair enough.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just a picture of Adam and Eve carved out of marble next to
Is that a graven image, Josh?
no.
I'm going to not read that quote because it goes over pluralism.
Oh,
and
that'll just
cultural
explode.
pluralism. And I don't think this episode can handle that much of a tangent. So,
Okay.
but very, very good stuff. A little bit of this postmodern existentialism that you're talking about, he covers,
Oh,
which is good. And like basically the first chapter, he lays out his thesis well. So yeah, read the first chapter and then find anything else you find interesting in the book.
cool.
Probably don't need to read it cover to cover, but I was doing some research, so I did it.
And title and author again?
Identity and Idolatry, The Image of God and Its Inversion by Richard Lintz, which is series edited by D.A. Carson from the New Studies in Biblical Theology.
By IVP.
And they're all gray. Every
Yeah.
single book.
But they're different colors of gray.
It's so stupid.
And it doesn't even follow, like, it's not like the first volume is like a gray and then they slowly get more bluish over time. No, it's just sporadic.
yeah.
Anyway.
Not even the same like texture.
It's
Like I found one the other day that was like a paper, like
A
a
matte.
more of a matte texture.
Yeah, I have the Covenant and Christology one that I have is just it's just a different paper.
Mm-hmm.
Everything's different about it.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's beautiful. Love that.
Mm-hmm.
But we're going to get to our topic now, which is an introduction to our slow walkthrough of Acts.
Yeah.
So what we did with Samuel, we walked through all of 1 Samuel, and before we get to 2 Samuel, at some point, we're going to take a little bit of a breather. We're going to step outside of the Old Testament for our like slow textual walking.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to hop to the new. We're going to go through Acts. So, you excited?
Woo!
Acts is an interesting book. It's like
And that's all we have to say, guys.
Wow.
See you next week.
Okay.
No.
in that outside of the Gospels, which is just 4, essentially, I say this in the biggest quotes possible, 4 versions of the same thing. Then you have Acts, the only other narrative piece in the New Testament. Whereas like the Old Testament has the first 5, it has like the Torah, Joshua, Judges, Ruth,
Yeah,
it has all
it
these
has
narratives.
history, different types of history going on in that, different subgenres of history, then wisdom literature, and then songs. And
Yeah.
like,
Whereas the New Testament is 4 versions of the same story, and then the history after that story, and then you have a bunch of letters, and then a guy going crazy because he's getting images from God, and then and that's the New Testament.
well, I think Acts. Well, obviously, Acts does the beautiful connection between.
Mm-hmm.
It helps us who are 2,000 years later
Yes.
see the connections between the letters from the apostles and all that, and the relationship of like that relationship to the gospel, to
Mhm.
Christ's work and life on earth.
And as a historical piece about Greek culture, the Mediterranean, like the eastern half of the Roman Empire,
Yep.
is so historically important for that whole area. It's crazy.
Yeah, and you get a lot of people who say, like, when you hear people talk about how accurate Luke was as a historian, there's a lot of those points in Acts as well. You'll find like he gets just the names of certain people right, or even as he opens the letter, what is it? Is it Theophilus?
Yeah.
That he entitles it to?
Which just means lover of God. So
Yeah, and that could be an open letter to. Anyways, we'll get into that actually when we talk about the first chapter, but not today.
couple like whatever, authorship and date.
Yeah.
How do you guys feel about those things? I landed on a pretty aggressive 64 years.
It was 64 AD?
64 to 65 AD.
Okay. Should I break it down quickly?
If you want to.
Very simple.
Yeah.
Most scholars believe between 70 and 90 AD. The next biggest group is around 60 AD. And then a far smaller group believe it's later than 90.
Yeah.
And so
I don't know. I've always been stuck with the thing that Caleb brings up. Caleb, you want to bring it up or me?
Sure. The drought. Okay, so one of the things recorded in Acts is I forget the. Oh man, it would be better if I remember his name. There's a New Testament guy who prophesies about a drought, right, in Jerusalem, and Luke is very intentional about talking about its fulfillment. Cool. He lays out the Christ's extensive prophecy of the fall of Jerusalem. Doesn't mention its fulfillment in Acts or even the Gospel of Luke. Cool.
Mm-hmm.
That would be huge. The fall of Jerusalem, destruction of the temple, all that kind of stuff.
Which
right?
happens in 70 AD.
70 AD, exactly. Also, Paul, oh man, I had in my notes when Paul and Peter died. Late 60s. Mid to late 60s. Neither of that is mentioned. And the gospel, not the gospel, the book of Acts ends with with a very positive outlook on Rome and Roman leadership, and with the statement of they proclaimed in the Roman world unopposed.
Yeah.
And that changed really fast in late 60s.
Yeah.
Mid to late 60s, when obviously Peter and Paul died. For those reasons alone, I'm super inclined to go, well, to me, it kind of forces the hand.
Yeah.
It has to be before those things. You're telling me that Luke would know all that, but not write it down. It would help his point. It goes into the purpose of the book. It helps his theological point of that the church is the fulfillment of Israel.
Yeah.
And the Gentiles are now grafted in and all that kind of stuff, especially with the destruction of Jerusalem. So it helps theologically. It helps his purpose as recording early church history. There's no reason for him to know all that, but not write it.
Is there a counterpoint for that from those who hold the more mainline view?
There are.
Could it be that writing those things would have a more like political distaste
Yeah.
right? Like that would be the idea. Is that
Yeah.
the reason he didn't write them down is because it's like, hey, it's a bit soon, Luke. Like, it's a bit
Yeah.
to be using that right now.
It's
But even then, that's not really the strongest, especially not when it seems to set out as a historical work.
well, there's the main, like I'm looking at there's a New Testament introductory that I'm looking at by what's his name? Donald Guthrie. The arguments are like, hey, he maybe quotes Josephus. Or hey, he maybe quotes Mark. Also, we, according to the late dating of Mark, well then Acts can't be after Mark then, is the argument. Or there's an allusion to Josephus's works, therefore it has to be later than when Josephus completed his works, which we're talking like almost early 2nd century. Right? It's stuff like that. Yeah. I'm not, or there'll be talk about how, well, some of the theological conceptions of who Christ is in Acts is a little too, what they'll say is like, it's too high of a Christology to match what the early church believed. But also the presupposition is that the early church had a rather low Christology, not one that matches with what which we would say is encapsulated in the Nicene Creed, that he is God of very God, light of light.
Yeah.
That is Christ is. Because it'll say things like, Christ, that God's blood, on the cross, stuff like that. Those would be the arguments. I don't find them as compelling.
Yep.
Fair enough.
Seems good to me.
Yeah, I mean, we don't usually spend a ton of time on dating, but yeah, I think that was pretty decent. Thanks, Caleb.
And then there's people that believe it's written way later, and
He's too accurate with who's in power at what time.
yeah,
Like he's accurate about who's in power at, over in Greece, and then he goes back to Judea, and he's accurate with about there. And also, there's some like people know the we passages.
yeah,
I think there's four or five, where it appears as though whoever's writing the work
it was with Paul.
is with Paul when those events are going down, and then he disappears and comes back and all that kind of stuff. So it's always been held that Luke was the writer. Been assumed that, and it doesn't seem really. If you can, for whatever reason, this is a jump for some people. If you can acknowledge that, hey, maybe one of Paul's traveling companions could have written the account, well, then the natural, obvious, and only clear answer is Luke.
Yeah,
But whatever.
Well, and the thing that was pointed out by IVP Bible background commentaries was the use of we is like the people that assert that the we is fictitious, or in other terms, don't understand that the majority of like the use of we in 1st century writings is rarely ever fictitious.
Yeah.
And so it's a modern assertion onto the text.
That's Keener, right?
Yeah.
Okay. He has the largest commentary on Acts
Yeah.
I have ever seen. It's 4 volumes. It's like 3,000 pages.
Yeah. And you're getting all of the historical stuff in his Bible background commentary. Like it's just,
Yeah.
That's insane. Imagine putting that much work into. Is
He's an insomniac, eh?
that what it is?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's why he writes so much.
yeah.
You know, I did know that. Yeah.
Yeah. Weird. A little bit of tidbit for you listener.
If you're Craig Keener, don't ask how we know that. That's just weird.
You sleep on that.
Yeah. That's good.
And so he also proposes that there are 2 purposes for Luke. Like together, people will say it's one or the other. He proposes that it's both a legal purpose and apologetic purpose. The apologetic purpose being this is what the church did, and the legal purpose being this was for Paul, and that he wrote it for both purposes.
Yeah. I think there's also, because it's the 2nd volume of his work, like Luke Acts, right? Excuse me. I think there's a little bit also of, many people have labored to make a catalog of the happenings, but I'm going to, blah, 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 dear Philosophus.
Yeah.
And we'll get into that when we actually cover that in our
Mhm.
chapter covering that. But I think just simple fact of recording the history for whoever Theophilus is,
Yeah.
is also a factor.
Yes.
It's just
Yes. Well, and that would be the apologetic point, is that like he's writing this for whoever this person is, for the case of like, hey, this is because you have become a Christian. Here's
Oh, I thought you
all
were
of the
talking
stuff.
about. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I assumed something else. I've heard the argument that it's written as an apologetic at Paul's trial.
no. That's the legal
Yeah.
purpose.
I see.
Yeah. So the legal purpose is
Forgive
for like Paul, like saying, hey, he's about to go to trial, and this is Luke coming in helpful for his friend he's traveled with. On like, here, this is what the guy did. Here's proof. And you can, but also to the major reason being for Theophilus, this person, this is you believe in this. Here's what's happened because of what you believe.
Yeah.
This is what you believe in.
And that's why it kind of leads up towards, well, it catalogs the entirety of what Paul has done.
Yeah.
Maybe not meticulously, but in its entirety. Yeah.
Yeah. It's at least, yeah. I
Well,
mean,
there's no shortage of theological messaging and ordering of events, not just necessarily ordering, but let's say prioritizing of certain events and highlighting stuff and the way things are presented. It is not really a theologically didactic book.
no.
Not in the same way that Paul's letters are, or even some of the Gospels. It's a little more historical like that.
Yeah.
Let's cover some of the wording that we're going to use, because even as you say, like a little more didactic. Let's go over that.
Sure. Well, I think didactic meaning like in like verbal teaching of
Yeah.
these are the set things.
Coming from the Greek word to teach.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, let's get into charisma.
Yeah, that was the one that actually I was thinking, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Do you want to just go over the charisma?
Do it. Sean.
So I know you have a more specific understanding of it because you've read charisma outside of Acts. But when we say charisma, we're specifically talking about the beliefs and teachings of the early church. So when we're going over Acts and we talk about the charisma, it's what does this teaching, this even we'll get to when Peter preaches a couple of times. Those are examples of didactic, teaching. But it's also examples of charisma. What did they believe? What did they preach as a community? Like what brought the early church together, both in belief and in like actual wording,
Mhm.
right? And so as we go through Acts, you'll hear charisma quite a few times. So don't be confused. It's a word to simplify a wider idea. But I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone uses it in the modern sense, do they?
One college prof of mine, yeah.
The modern church's charisma?
Oh no,
that's
modern church
what I meant.
charisma. Sorry, I thought you meant no one in the modern church uses it.
Oh, no.
Yeah. No, it's in other books as well, but not that I've heard. Normally,
It's specifically used
yeah,
for like an
Or-
ancient understanding.
yeah, and not even just like 2nd century Christianity. They're talking
Mhm.
like in the time of the New Testament penning.
Yeah.
You have some, what's his name? C.H. Dodd? What's his name? Whatever, I haven't read the book. Regardless, there are some scholars who have used, there's the New Testament, not New Testament, there's a 1st century early church document called the Didache. Could be have even, and I think it even likely so personally, existed before the penning of Revelation.
Okay.
You're talking written
Mhm.
in the New Testament time. If it itself wasn't written, it's actually a compilation of 4 other documents, but that's fine. Several of those documents then would have existed during the apostles' lifetime.
Mm.
Which is why the Didache is often called the teaching of the apostles.
And really, what it is, it's kind of like your manual handbook of what is a church, what is the Christian belief,
Yeah.
how do you do a church, how do you do a baptismal service, what does it mean, what is it like? Very introductory, very basic.
Mhm.
So several scholars have tried to make connections between what is the charisma, the early church believing in core identity, core identifying identity defining beliefs of Christianity in Acts. And how do we tie that to the Didache? Because they're not even a generation apart.
Mhm.
And some have done it to a greater or lesser degree of success. But there is connections. So that's fascinating.
And that would make sense if that was written by the apostles, and this is written about the church.
So
And the book of Acts is called the Acts of the Apostles. Yeah.
just like the sword of the Lord,
What?
it's the Acts of the Apostles.
Oh my goodness.
No, the things that the apostles did.
Oh,
Mm.
oh man, I've been
ACT,
I've been spelling this wrong in all of my notes.
not AXE.
Well, that's not the subject, guys. Come on, let's keep going.
That's what St. Boniface was using against Yggdrasil, right?
That's so deep too. Listen to our Christmas episode for an explanation of maybe that joke.
It's not worth it. Anyway, moving on.
So there's a couple ways to break. There's 4 ways that we have broken down the book of Acts. Sorry, 3 ways, and then a cool point.
So we kind of did it like serious, and then we did the last one was like kind of like a goofy picture. Yeah.
So the first way to break it down, which was the way Caleb kind of saw a progression in the book of Acts, which was the numerical growth of the church.
Hmm.
In 5 points. Do you want to cover that?
No, go for it. I've
Okay.
talked way too much.
So first is you see the church grow in the book of Acts because and we'll talk about this throughout the series, but there is a deep connection between the book of Joshua, but also after Sinai.
Mhm.
The progression of Israel going into the land, and the book of Acts describing the church and Paul spreading the church throughout Israel and then also the wider world. Also because it's the same area for some of it. But you see the same growth in the same patterns of people moving and stuff like that. And so you see the church growing. In the beginning, you have on the day of Pentecost, 3,000 are added, it says.
Mm.
And then after that, you hear added day by day those who were being saved. So,
So the whole verse
yes.
is they ate together,
Mm-hmm.
and then day by day those who were being saved.
Yes.
And I like that they ate together. That's an important part for me.
You know what's something funny that I've noticed?
Mhm.
3 churches, 2 of which that I visited, 1 of which I go to.
Yeah.
They grow, and you know what of those 3 churches that I've gone to recently, of which they always have, after every service, they have like coffee and tea and like, snacks
Yes.
every service.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I think it works.
Yeah.
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 Eating together is incredibly important.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Even if it's not a full blown meal, but just the social aspect is huge.
This is
Yeah.
one of the first things I ever preached on, actually.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah. I had gotten back from a missions trip, and they got me to do a testimony. And they're like, "Yeah, what do you think like actually worked well?" I'm like, "Eating together, dude. Like just eating together with people. That's how you get to know people."
Gib food.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So you have this in the first moment of the church, like starting, is when Peter gives his speech. You get 3,000 people come into the church. And then you have, after that, just day by day, people are being saved as this movement is growing. And then you have up to 5,000 by the time of Peter's explanation of the lame man is healed in chapter 4. And then you have, in chapter 4:32, you have soon a multitude. And then after that, multitudes.
Yeah. And then later on, there's the term thousands thrown around. Thousand is thrown around elsewhere, and then thousands. It's just,
And then at the end of the book, there's the church grows throughout Rome and the empire
yeah.
without opposition.
It's clear that in Acts, Luke is
Mhm.
trying to get across that it's just, hey, there's just this ball of momentum accumulating.
Yeah.
And the like, with the perspective of, it's salvation is coming to all people everywhere.
Yeah. And then you have another breakdown of Acts. It is the geographical growth. So from chapters 1 to 8, they're in Jerusalem.
Mhm.
And then from chapters 8 to 12, they're in Samaria and Judea. And then in chapters 12 to 28, they're to the ends of the earth.
And this is the second way that we're breaking,
Yes.
or like
Yes.
we noticed Acts could be breaking down.
and that matches what Jesus says to them, like
Exactly.
in his ascension in chapter 1. So chapter 1, verse 8. But you will receive power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and in all Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth.
Yeah.
I have a funny little thought about this with the ends of the earth thing. So you can read it on whether all of Judea and Samaria is one thing or
Yeah.
whether that's two things. It depends, depending on who you're reading. They'll say there's 4 phases:
Mhm.
Jerusalem, then Judea, then Samaria, then all the ends of the earth.
Mhm.
Or they'll say there's 3: Jerusalem, Judea, and Samaria, and all the earth. Regardless, doesn't matter.
Well, and the way you can look at that, if you're going to pair them together, is Judea and Samaria together is old Israel. And so you go from city to nation to the world.
Yeah.
Well, I think you end up, yes. I think you
Yeah.
have Jerusalem, right?
Mhm.
Like the holy city. Then you have Judea, classically considered like the more the more puritanical
Yeah.
religious elite. Then you have Samaria, the people who are actually half Jews,
Yes.
and then you have all the earth, the
Yes,
Gentiles.
the
And so like there's this like from the inner cell of
Mhm.
like, Second Temple Judaism outward, going first from in Jerusalem, the most elite, and then less. But the interesting thing that I find, at least I find it interesting, it goes into the ends of the earth.
Mhm.
That's what Jesus says, right? It's what the pattern that Acts follows.
Yes.
Like it does end with Paul in Rome.
Yeah.
Rome, the center of the known world,
Mhm.
is where the gospel ends. Here's my theory, at least. Why? Because I think it's a play on words and kind of the center of pagan power, which is the furthest thing away from God.
Mhm.
Right? That's the end of the earth. You
Yes.
cannot get further from God than the center
Yeah.
of a foreign, dictatorial, evil, pagan society.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you
That's
also
the
have
idea.
Roman world, that the Roman Empire was the entire world.
Yeah.
That was the whole thing.
Mhm.
And so you've also got that idea of they're at the edges of the map that they have.
You're right, but the
Yeah.
book ends with
Yes.
Paul getting to the center of what Roman people would think
Yes.
is, and yet the book, at least thematically, calls that
Yes.
the edge of the earth, the ends of the earth.
Yeah.
And so I think that it's a play on it's a play on those people who are
Mhm.
furthest away from God. That's the
Yeah.
ends of the earth.
Yeah.
Mm.
You've also got if people listened to our Genesis episode, you've also got like the city, nation, world. You've got a repetition of also that idea of like 3
Intrinsic
concentric rings
Yeah.
of now it's the garden, like the Eden garden, the world. And so like you've got the idea of the glory of God being spread out from the center,
Mhm.
which is cool too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then you have generally, I took it just a text outline from FF
More like
versus
Acts.
Yeah. Like,
Act 1, Act 2.
yeah, exactly. Like what happens as the story progresses. And so you've got chapters 1 to 5, you've got the birth of the church. This is the church is formulating. Peter and the church are essentially creating like the group, the system. We have deacons now. This is how you tithe. This is the people are dedicating themselves to prayer and the teachings of the disciples. Like you've got the structure and the formation of church starting. And then you have from chapter 6 to 9, you've got persecution, which leads to expansion.
Mm.
And so you've got the church starts to spread out from where it currently is, and the church is starting to get hit with, people are starting to notice it. It's getting out of hand. The religious structures don't like it. And then you've got from chapters 9 to 12, you've got the Acts of Peter and the beginning of the Gentile church, Christianity.
Christianity doesn't begin with the Gentile church.
No, the Acts of Peter and the beginnings of Gentile Christianity.
Mm.
So the idea of before this, you've got it's Jewish, And then now Gentiles are getting brought in with Peter going through that whole situation.
Yeah, I still
Yeah.
don't like the wording, but okay, well, it's fine.
Yes. The idea that Gentiles are now being brought into that.
Yeah, but like Jews aren't in Christianity; they're Christians.
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah. I was
Yes.
trying to figure out what your
That becomes a highlighted thing later on in Paul's.
That's for
Conversation.
when we do that problem.
Yes. But the idea of Peter having to break that mindset
Yeah.
of this is
Cornelius.
not Judaism, this is a new thing. And it's what it's supposed to become. And the idea of Jews and Gentiles is gone.
Mm.
That you are now Christians. And that's what God's trying to drill into Peter's head, but Peter's got a thick skull like all of us.
My man.
Yep. Representative of us all.
Yep.
Foot and mouth syndrome.
Yes. And so you've got basically like it starts off with section 3, chapters 9 to 12. You've got Peter. And then chapter 4 is you've got Paul. Section 4, which starts in chapter 13 to 16. You've got Paul's first missionary tour and the apostolic decree. You've got all that stuff. And then it goes into Paul's evangelization on the Aegean shores, as it's called.
So, Christianity proclaimed in Europe.
Yes, exactly. It is moving out of Asia into Europe. And then in 19 to 28, you've got Paul's plan to visit Rome and gets there by unforeseen route. And that is his whole trip back to Jerusalem, gets arrested for bringing in a Gentile to the temple.
So, yeah, supposedly.
Some stuff going on there.
Mm.
He gets beat up, pulls out his passport. They're like, oh man, we're beating up a Roman citizen.
That happens in that doesn't happen in Jerusalem.
You're right.
Happens at Rome.
Yes.
It happens in Colossae? Does it happen in Colossae?
Mm. I'm
It's
not sure.
It's somewhere in Greece.
That's the Laodicea time when he's getting attacked with because they think he's Zeus and Hermes.
No.
Oh yeah, because he got bitten by the snake.
Nope, that happens on Malta.
Well, that's when they think he's Zeus.
Yeah.
No, because him and Barnabas are
Yeah.
called Zeus and whatnot.
Oh, you're right.
I think.
Man, it's gonna be embarrassing for all of us. I think.
Either I'm right about it and I'm doing real good,
Yeah.
or
Yep. One of the two. I'm going to put my vote with you. And then, so he goes through that whole trial, gets put in prison.
I
The
appeal
guy
to
said-
Caesar.
Yes. The guy says, I'll get to it. A year passes or time passes. New guy's in charge now. Wait, there's a guy in prison. We don't know why. They talk to him. I appeal to Caesar. He goes to Rome.
Yep.
And meets with either Caesar or a prefect.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tradition has him meet with Nero, if my memory is right. Either way, he's beheaded.
Yep.
But yeah.
Him meeting with Nero is a wild image.
Could you imagine?
But
What-
it never, obviously, it never says that. Like when we talk about the death of Paul, that is something that is in tradition, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It's not recorded in
It's not recorded.
in
Book facts.
scripture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's beheaded outside the city.
Because
Yeah.
that's how a Roman citizen is punished.
Yes.
Yes. Because they're not crucified.
Nope.
Yeah.
And then you have generally we're going to go over Paul's missionary journeys, but that's not the breakdown of the book.
No, we might even do a whole distinct episode on that at some point.
We will.
Maybe take a hiatus as we're going through
Yeah.
Acts and focus on that.
So I've always found lectures on Paul's journey to be like a hard listen,
yeah.
right? Because it is, there's a lot of piecing together timelines and things. And sometimes that
Mhm.
doesn't work over an audio format. So we'll record something, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah, it's not immediately obvious reading Acts and the letters what it is that Paul does on his journeys.
Yeah.
You have to, like you said, you have to piece some things together from different notes from different books.
Oh, there's even like things that are implied from his letters
Mhm.
that you have to then plug in and say like, well, where does this fit in his
Yep.
journeys and acts, right?
Which also puts some fun work to do for dating certain epistles.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, Acts both, it helps immensely to
Mhm.
understand the epistles.
Yeah.
It also creates some interesting questions. Not like they're impossible. They're just like, what?
Yeah, it makes it interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, so he has 3 journeys he went on. A 4th one he wanted to go on. Maybe did, maybe didn't.
Did you think he went all the way to Spain?
I don't know.
Okay.
I haven't done enough work on it.
Yeah, me neither.
Yeah. So the
But that's
first
a big point of contention, right? Whether he actually made it to Spain or not.
Yes. So we'll get to there. The first missionary journey is to Cyprus and southern Anatolia.
That's Turkey for people.
Yes. The second is through Anatolia and the east side of Greece,
Mhm.
stopping in Ephesus shortly on the return. And the third is very similar to the second with some variations. In these trips, span about 12 to 15 years of Paul's life.
Mhm.
And although he had intentions to make a 4th trip to Iberia, Spain, which is what Spain was called at the
Ye-
time,
Yeah.
Iberia, it was cut short with his arrest in Jerusalem.
Yeah.
So the 4th tour would have been, if potentially he did, potentially he didn't get all the way to Spain.
Yeah.
Yeah. But he does go to Rome.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe he gets arrested a second time after coming back from Spain, and then that's when he dies, or he doesn't leave and dies.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
If he did, that would be the idea of him getting to Spain and it not being recorded in the same way that there might have been a third book in the
Corinthians.
well, no, yes, but also like a sequel to Acts that people theorize.
Oh.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Meh.
Yeah.
Meh.
Well, it's just the idea that like maybe they did exist, but it doesn't matter for scripture.
Well, it's not. It wasn't. It wasn't what God intended for us to use
Yes.
as our ultimate court of appeal.
Yep.
And by that, you mean it wasn't around when we were doing, or at least didn't make it through the the canonization of Scripture.
Yeah.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, I'm not going to like make any promises to the audience, but what I do want to ask you guys, if we're ready to do this
Yep.
part of the podcast, what in Acts are you guys looking forward to talking about? Like, what's like your favorite part and why?
The part that interests me the most, like intellectually, like, whoa, like what? That's so cool. Is actually right in the beginning, and it's the Matthias becoming the
Replacement of Judas.
replacement of Judas. Because he's also, does that make him? Yeah, that makes him. There's 13 apostles plus 1 minus 1.
Yeah.
Because you have minus Judas plus apostle,
Yeah.
plus Paul.
I'm excited to dissect Stephen's speech.
Mm-hmm.
That was hard for me to say.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Um,
at the stoning of Stephen.
I
Stephen's speech is the stoning of Stephen.
yeah, well, that happens after the speech, not before.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I'm just making tongue twisters. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm excited to get into that. I'm excited to get into the First Council of Jerusalem.
Yep.
And personally, I'm excited about the amount of times baptism shows up, but that'll be interesting.
Mhm.
Okay, so you think we're going to be hitting that a couple times?
Yeah, whether or not
Oh,
Colton and I argue about it on the podcast, we
Yeah.
will be after.
well, that, and we're also gonna have to confront our
Yeah.
because we've got Pentecostals in this group. We're gonna have to talk about spirit baptism too.
Yeah, that actually might be
Yeah.
the first episode
Yeah.
because it's right there.
I won't be here.
Really?
He's gonna
That's
be
true.
gone.
Yeah.
I get to
You
skip
might
out
miss
on that
that.
one. Anyway.
I will save it for you, buddy. Don't worry. I'm like in a current like modern day situation. I'm against book burning. I think it's very interesting that was the way that the Ephesians turned from their
Is it their version of burning the idols?
Yeah, and that's what you got to tie
Yeah.
it into, right? Like,
From
is that
the Old
was they
Testament.
were elements of worship.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Well, and that's one of the, like I read, what was it? Clint E. Arnold
Mm.
has a bunch of great stuff on Ephesians, both Colossians stuff and Ephesians. Sorry.
Thought you were going to say he had a lot of great stuff on burning books. I was like, oh, okay.
He has a lot of good stuff on what the occult practice and religious mindset is in that
Yeah.
area.
Like the cult of Dionysus.
Less that, like Artemis, stuff like that.
Okay.
And how in Ephesus there was a big market, and you even see this with Alexander the coppersmith, silversmith. Oh no, I don't remember now. Whatever, the one
He's
who
a smith.
causes the Ephesian riot, who stirs up the people. There's a big market on, like, trinkets that have inscribed certain runes and certain phrases that bring this luck and that luck and this stuff into your life. Coppersmith. And books and religious texts also have a big significance in that. And so one of the things in the modern conception of books is that they are repositories of information,
yeah.
not religious artifacts that emanate things in of themselves. Because if those books in that passage are articulated in the latter,
Yeah.
then their burning makes way more sense.
Yeah. They probably weren't burning history books. Not in the same way we think of, like, when a conquering army comes in and wants to wipe out the previous history or like, it's not that kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's a turning away from
That'll be
idols.
good. I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, I'll probably, look into that a little bit more.
Yeah.
But and Snake.
Snake.
Time he gets bit by Snake and everyone's like, why that
Shake
didn't kill you?
And then starts
And
a whole
Paul's like-
denomination about
Yeah.
purposely getting bit by snakes to show that you're a Christian.
The origin of Snake Church. That's what it is.
Yeah, I remember that time that
Benny Hinn or whatever.
Paul specifically actually allowed himself to be bit by a snake. Remember that?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, that didn't happen.
You saying it was an
that's
accident?
that's a funny joke about the misappropriation of scripture to prove your point in bad churches where people
Thanks,
purposely
Josh.
got.
Now, to be fair, I don't want to call people out for not seeing red flags in their churches. But if it's like a venomous snake, it's not like.
Well, there's a level in which you are testing the Lord.
Really? But it says in the end of Mark that they will handle poisonous snakes,
Yes.
not be bitten.
Yes.
So
They will
here's
drink poison.
They will, but they won't. They won't.
They won't do it on purpose and test God about it.
Yes.
Hmm.
And you've also got the more standard idea of like Moses, who is the tamer of chaos and the defeater of the serpent.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just Josh. Yeah. High abstract thought.
What about the archetypical mage of Moses?
Do you think the 4 pillars of the earth are the archetype of, Moses' staff going into the Red Sea?
Well, I can see where you're going with that, Josh, but
Short studies in biblical theology. One of them is the biblical theology of serpents throughout the Old and New Testament.
snakes.
And one of the symbols that you see that God uses in some of the people of the Old Testament to show that they are his chosen person of use at the time is them defeating or having power over serpents. You have Moses turning the staff into the serpent. You have Saul defeating Nachash, the serpent, the man that's name is Serpent. You have the creation of the bronze serpents. You have the disciples being told blah, blah, blah. And it's the use of the defeating of serpents in the same way that the promise of the original Messiah would crush the head of the serpent.
That's awesome.
That's
And so-
awesome.
You should do something.
We should
about
write
that.
a book about it and call it For Goodness Snakes.
It's good.
That'd be pretty solid. Maybe we
it's-
should start Snake Church.
Anyways,
No.
all that to say, people misunderstanding the text to say, hey, I can just take a snake whenever I want and get bit by it is not seeing the image for what it is.
But if that's what you believe, I encourage you.
No. We as Second Rate Saints,
The farthest we'll go is Gecko Church. Anyways, next
15 minutes could save you 15 minutes. You said a car
Geico
insurance.
Church. Well, this is devolved.
Tie this 15% here. Man, yeah, I'm sorry.
There's just so many good snake jokes. What of it?
You know what? It's better than online.
Yep.
Just like you guys shouldn't
What are
go
you
around
doing?
saying.
Hey, Keener.
What are you doing? Why are you going to boomer tangents? What's going on?
I was gonna say just
Better
like
than seeing it on the internet.
why are
He says on his podcast.
Why? That's what I was gonna go. I was gonna go to the point of like, you know, don't believe everything you hear on an audio form podcast like this one.
Yeah.
Or like the intro of our podcast where it says, weigh what you hear with what you know. Mm-hmm.
It does say that.
I waited for about a second.
Then I shared my opinion. Man, we've devolved.
Nah.
It's pretty second rate of us.
Yeah, that's okay.
I think it's going to be an interesting read. I think that Acts has a lot to say about what church is supposed to look like, right? Or not necessarily what it's supposed to look like, but what the essence of our gathering together should be, right? What is fellowship? What is mission? Like, what is the expansion of the church even? Like, what does a healthy growing church look like?
The purpose
And,
of the local church. Yeah.
And why eating food together is the way you get people to come to your church.
The way you grow is by
Nice.
eating food. Very good, Josh.
It's a
And
mix.
that's why eating the Lord's Supper together, eating the Eucharist, is how a church grows.
I'm getting
It's
spiritually
how a
big.
body grows.
Milk and solid food, brothers.
Anyway.
No, what I'm more excited for is we went through Samuel, and that was awesome, actually. I liked getting into the nitty gritty and doing it like week by week with you guys. Great. Not a lot of pastoral care stuff in in Samuel. In fact, murdering kings is like not super applicable to everyday ministry. So what I am excited for is kind of bouncing some stuff off the wall when it comes to a more
Evangelistic.
modern representation of the church.
Yes.
Yeah.
Lovely.
Do we
Well, you sound very excited, Caleb.
want to end it here?
A
Probably.
little bit, yeah.
Joel, you know what to do.
This has been Second Rate Saints. You can check us out at www.secondраtesaints.com. Please ask a parent before going online.
What?
No, I'm sorry. I think that's from the Family Channel. Anyways, if you'd like to contribute to the financial growth of Second Rate Saints and the expansion of whatever we're doing here, go to buymeacoffee.com/secondраtesaints.com.
Yes.
/Second Rate Saints. I don't think there's a .com at the end of that. It has been so great to go over Acts, and I'm excited to see. I'm just spiraling.
That's what we do best here.
I do like the spiral.
Yeah.
It's been fun.
Love all of you. Please contact us. It makes my day. I know it makes the rest of the other guys here's day. And we'll do our best to
Caleb,
respond.
I do the outros. What are you doing?
You're not doing it very well.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah, but we can't change things. He still has to finish it.
Okay, you can send us a comment or email, or you can email us at secondраtesaints@gmail.com. Thanks for listening, everybody. Have a great week and Happy New Year.
Bye.
Peace out.
Wart.